Imagine walking through a tropical forest nearly 2 million years ago. The air is warm and heavy with the smell of ripe fruit. Beneath towering trees, hundreds of figs, berries, and wild palm fruits have fallen onto the forest floor. Some were knocked down by monkeys. Others simply became too ripe to remain on their branches. For several days, invisible organisms have been quietly transforming those fruits. Tiny wild yeasts living naturally on their skins begin consuming the sugar inside. As they do, they produce something surprisingly familiar: alcohol. Long before breweries, long before vineyards, long before anyone fermented grain into beer, nature had already invented alcohol. This raises an extraordinary question. Did Stone Age humans ever become drunk? Or is intoxication something that only appeared after civilization? The answer begins much earlier than most people imagine. Many people assume alcohol is an artificial invention created by humans. In reality, ethanol is one of nature's oldest chemical products. Wild yeast exists almost everywhere. It lives on fruit skins, tree bark, leaves, flowers, even floating invisibly through the air. Whenever sugar-rich fruit becomes damaged or overripe, these microscopic fungi begin breaking the sugars apart through fermentation. The result is ethanol, exactly the same type of alcohol found in beer, wine, and spirits today. Across tropical forests, this process happens constantly. Every single day, thousands of fruits fall from trees. Some are eaten immediately. Others remain on the ground beneath the warm sun. Within hours or days, fermentation begins naturally. The prehistoric world was quietly producing alcohol millions of years before humans ever understood chemistry. Even more surprising is the fact that humans are far from the only animals that encounter it. Modern scientists have documented numerous species consuming naturally fermented foods. Chimpanzees have been observed eating fermented fruits. Spider monkeys sometimes consume overripe fruit containing measurable alcohol. Fruit bats regularly feed on fermenting fruit. Certain bird species intentionally seek out overripe berries. Perhaps the most remarkable example comes from Southeast Asia. The Malaysian tree shrew feeds almost every night on nectar, naturally containing alcohol concentrations comparable to weak beer. Yet despite consuming alcohol regularly, the animal rarely appears visibly intoxicated. Its metabolism has adapted remarkably well to this unusual diet. These discoveries completely change the way we think about alcohol. Instead of asking when humans invented drinking, scientists began asking a different question. How long has alcohol already been part of the natural environment? For our ancestors, fruit represented one of the most important food sources available. Early hominins regularly ate wild figs, berries, palm fruits, wild grapes, numerous tropical fruits that ripened seasonally across African forests. Whenever some of these fruits remained on the ground long enough, fermentation almost certainly began. This means our distant ancestors probably encountered small amounts of ethanol long before agriculture ever existed. Not because they were trying to become intoxicated, simply because fermentation was already happening all around them. This idea inspired one of the most fascinating hypotheses in evolutionary biology. It is known as the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. Proposed by biologist Robert Dudley, the hypothesis suggests that our attraction to the smell of tiny amounts of ethanol may actually have evolved because it helped primates locate ripe, energy-rich fruit. When fruit begins fermenting, it releases ethanol into the air. Even extremely low concentrations produce a distinctive smell. For fruit-eating primates searching dense forests, that scent may have acted like a natural beacon. It signaled something extremely valuable: sugar, calories, energy. Natural selection may therefore have favored individuals capable of detecting ethanol before they could even see the fruit itself. If true, our relationship with alcohol did not begin in taverns or wineries. It began with survival. But an even bigger mystery remains. Finding naturally fermented fruit is one thing. Actually becoming drunk from eating it is something entirely different. If our ancestors regularly encountered naturally fermented fruit, an obvious question follows. Did they actually become drunk? The answer is probably yes, but not in the way most people imagine. Modern alcoholic drinks contain remarkably high concentrations of ethanol. Most beers contain around 4 to 6% alcohol. Wine often reaches 10 to 15%. Distilled spirits such as whiskey or vodka may exceed 40% alcohol. These concentrations are only possible because humans intentionally control fermentation and, in some cases, distillation. Nature rarely produces alcohol at those levels. Most naturally fermented fruits contain much smaller amounts, often less than 1%, sometimes 2 or 3%, occasionally a little higher under ideal conditions. That may sound insignificant. Yet for animals weighing far less than humans, even these small concentrations can influence behavior. More importantly, eating fermented fruit is very different from drinking concentrated alcohol. The alcohol is diluted throughout the fruit itself. Fiber slows digestion. The amount consumed usually remains relatively small. To reach the level of intoxication produced by several glasses of beer, an early human would likely have needed to consume an enormous quantity of heavily fermented fruit in a short period of time. Such situations probably occurred only occasionally. Perhaps after storms knocked large numbers of ripe fruits onto the forest floor. Perhaps beneath trees producing exceptionally abundant harvests. Perhaps during unusually warm conditions that accelerated fermentation. Most days, however, our ancestors probably consumed only tiny amounts of ethanol without noticing any dramatic effects. But evolution left behind another fascinating clue. About 10 million years ago, something remarkable happened inside the bodies of our ancient ape ancestors. Scientists studying the evolution of digestive enzymes discovered an important genetic mutation affecting a protein known as alcohol dehydrogenase 4, or ADH4. This enzyme helps break down ethanol after it enters the body. Research suggests that one particular version of ADH4 became dramatically more efficient than earlier forms. Instead of processing alcohol slowly, the mutated enzyme could metabolize ethanol dozens of times more effectively. Why would evolution favor such a change? One possible explanation involves a major shift in where our ancestors found food. Earlier apes spent much of their lives high in the trees. Later ancestors increasingly searched for food on the forest floor. Down there, ripe fruits often remained after falling from branches. Many had already begun fermenting. Individuals capable of digesting small amounts of ethanol safely would have gained access to an abundant food source that others might avoid. Over thousands of generations, natural selection gradually favored improved alcohol metabolism. Notice what evolution was doing. It was not preparing humans for wine. It was not anticipating breweries. It was not encouraging intoxication. It was simply improving the ability to eat naturally fermenting fruit without suffering toxic consequences. That distinction is extremely important. The human body did not evolve because alcohol became part of civilization. Civilization later took advantage of a biological system that evolution had already built. Could prehistoric humans occasionally have become mildly intoxicated? Very likely. Imagine discovering an entire grove filled with fallen fruit that had fermented for several days beneath the tropical sun. After eating enough of it, slight dizziness, reduced coordination, or altered behavior would not be impossible. Modern animals occasionally display exactly these effects after consuming unusually large amounts of fermented fruit. Stories occasionally appear in newspapers describing birds flying erratically after eating fermented berries or mammals behaving strangely following seasonal fruit harvests. Although some popular stories become exaggerated over time, scientists agree that natural intoxication can occur under the right circumstances. Still, these events appear relatively uncommon. For most of human evolution, alcohol was probably an occasional byproduct of finding ripe food rather than a substance intentionally consumed for recreation. This leads to another fascinating question. If early humans probably experienced only mild natural intoxication from fermented fruit, what about becoming high? Did Stone Age people ever deliberately alter their minds using psychoactive plants long before the first civilizations appeared? Alcohol was almost certainly not the only mind-altering substance our ancestors encountered. Nature is filled with chemicals capable of changing perception, mood, and behavior. Long before pharmacists synthesized medicines, long before civilizations cultivated vineyards, long before anyone understood the chemistry of the brain, plants and fungi had already been producing psychoactive compounds for millions of years. The question is whether Stone Age humans deliberately sought them out. The honest answer is that we do not yet know. Archaeology can reveal stone tools, animal bones, and ancient hearths with remarkable precision. Recovering direct evidence for the consumption of psychoactive plants, however, is much more difficult. leaves decay. Mushrooms disappear within days. Flowers rarely survive for thousands of years. Unlike stone spear points or pottery, most ancient drugs leave very little behind. This means scientists must be extremely careful. There is currently no strong evidence that Paleolithic hunter-gatherers regularly used psychoactive substances in the same intentional way that many later civilizations did. That distinction matters. It is tempting to imagine prehistoric shamans gathering magical mushrooms around campfires, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So far, that evidence remains limited for the earliest periods of human history. What we do know is that the natural world constantly exposed our ancestors to biologically active chemicals. Thousands of plant species manufacture compounds specifically designed to influence animal nervous systems. Some evolved these chemicals as defenses against insects. Others protect seeds from being eaten. Many affect mammals as well. Occasionally, humans would have encountered them simply by exploring unfamiliar foods: a strange berry, an unusual root, a bitter leaf, a wild mushroom growing after heavy rain. Most would have tasted unpleasant. Some would have been harmless. A few could have produced dizziness, vivid dreams, hallucinations, or poisoning. Like every other aspect of prehistoric survival, learning probably occurred through trial and error. Communities remembered which plants were nutritious, which were medicinal, which were dangerous. Knowledge accumulated slowly across countless generations. Eventually, long after the Stone Age began, archaeological evidence becomes much clearer. Cannabis appears in several ancient societies. Opium poppies were cultivated in parts of the ancient Near East. Coca leaves became important in the Andes thousands of years later. Tobacco spread widely throughout the Americas long before European contact. These discoveries demonstrate that humans eventually learned to intentionally use psychoactive plants. But almost all of this evidence comes from agricultural or post-agricultural societies, not from the earliest hunter-gatherers who first evolved across Africa. For Paleolithic humans, accidental exposure was probably much more common than deliberate intoxication. The same was likely true for alcohol, a few fermented fruits, perhaps a naturally fermented palm nectar, occasionally an unfamiliar mushroom, rare encounters rather than everyday habits. Ironically, the most important evolutionary story hidden inside alcohol is not about getting drunk at all. It is about food. For millions of years, fruit represented one of the richest sources of energy available to fruit-eating primates. Natural fermentation often signaled fruit that was fully ripe and packed with sugar. Being able to smell tiny amounts of ethanol may have helped our ancestors locate valuable food more efficiently. Being able to digest that ethanol safely allowed them to consume calories that might otherwise have been wasted. Evolution was solving a nutritional problem. Human culture later transformed that ancient adaptation into something entirely different. Today, breweries carefully control fermentation. Winemakers monitor sugar content. Distilleries concentrate alcohol far beyond anything normally found in nature. Modern alcoholic beverages are products of technology, agriculture, and chemistry. Yet the biological machinery that processes every sip remains astonishingly ancient. The enzymes inside your liver still perform a task they began millions of years before the first farmer planted grain. The next time you raise a glass of beer or wine, remember something remarkable. The story of alcohol did not begin in a tavern. It did not begin with civilization. It did not even begin with humanity. It began deep inside ancient forests, where invisible yeast quietly fermented fallen fruit beneath the trees. One of our distant ancestors may have tasted that fruit without realizing anything unusual had happened. No celebrations, no drinking songs, no breweries. Just another meal gathered from the forest floor. Yet hidden inside that ordinary moment was the beginning of one of humanity's oldest biological relationships. Perhaps the greatest surprise is not that Stone Age humans occasionally encountered alcohol. It is that every modern human still carries inside the body an evolutionary system shaped by those ancient forests. Sometimes, the oldest stories in human history begin with something as simple as a piece of overripe fruit lying silently beneath a tree.